In this video, we are speaking with a full-time NFT investor on the current climate of NFTs and cryptocurrency in 2022. As usual, if you enjoyed this content, make sure that you hit the like button and smash the subscribe button. Really helps us out making NFT videos every single day. And as always, nothing in this video is financial advice. We're definitely not financial advisors. The NFT space is incredibly risky, so always do your own research. Josh Bobrowski. How are you, Josh? This is long overdue. You contribute to our morning space every day, so I'm really excited to get a chance to speak with you.
What's up, man? Thanks for having me. And just like you said, to reiterate, nothing I say is financial advice. And appreciative to be on the show in the morning. I really enjoy that. And then I also, happy to do a long form content. Cool. Looks like the MFers are struggling a little bit, but still way up on the 2-month timeline.
Yeah, I believe that's at least a 10x from where you bought in, right? You bought in at 0.35.
No. I bought in at like 0.2 and under.
Oh, wow.
But that being said, totally okay with whatever. I did exit most of my position. I think I bought about 8 or 10 of them, and I exited most of them. I still keep 2 left, but the last one I sold was at like 4.6, give or take. And they were up to 6 ETH for a little bit. So at least for me on the motherfuckers, huge fan, big believer, but also as a professional investor, I'm really of the mindset of like, if you can get a 10 or a 20x in a month or two,
Yeah.
you almost need to take some profits. You're never going to buy the bottom and sell the top. And I've got a lot of friends that are, professional hedge fund managers, multi-billion-dollar AUM. And the biggest piece of advice I always think of for most people is like, realize there's not a single financial professional in the world in any field that only buys the bottom and only sells the top.
Sure.
So in our industry, like we're almost spoiled of getting these like 10x's or like the norm. 100x isn't even like a crazy thing. And everyone knows at least somebody that bought a Bored Ape and now has a 1,000x, a 5,000x on their initial mint.
Yeah, and that's something that I wanted to ask you about because there's obviously a big difference between being like, managing a personal portfolio versus being a professional investor, or, managing a portfolio as your full-time job. I wanted to ask you about how often you actually do take profits. I know that you've kind of anecdotally told me about your World of Women investment, and I don't know if that's something that you'd be open to talking about.
Sure.
Because that's interesting to me that you sold, it sounds like almost all of your MFers investment, and it was an absolutely fantastic investment. And given where the floor is at now, it sounds like that was the right thing to do. I'd love to know how you think about things, like selling versus not selling, like profit taking versus not.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things I always talk about is a Sharpe ratio. So a Sharpe ratio is a fancy kind of finance talk way of just saying like risk to reward ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when you think about the risk to reward, as a US based citizen, taxes play a really large role in taking profits. So
Right.
if at all possible, I think that you should be buying and holding for north of a year. And so just to do the math on this really quickly, if you have $1 million in profit and it's short-term gains, you're going to pay about half into the government, just taxes, state and local, whatever way you chop it up. So if you make $1 million profit in short-term gains, that's 500 grand you take home. If you make $1 million profit on long-term gains and you're also in a position to capitalize on it as a long-term capital gain, you're looking at taking home 800,000. So you think about it, and that's a like over 50% greater, right? Like you would have to make $1.5 million in short-term gains in order to still be a little less than you would make making $1 million in long-term gains. Because if you made 1.5 million, you'd end up with 750,000 if you in the short-term game. And then in a long-term capital gain, you'd only need to make $1 million. So when you think about it from that perspective, I try to buy and hold for a long run. That being said, I also think if you don't have an extreme amount of conviction in a project, or even if you do, if you get a 10x, if you get a 20x, if you get a 50x on it, I think it's good to take profits. But here's my caveat. I almost always try to buy multiples of whatever I buy, because too many people are like, oh, I'll buy one World of Women. And then you know, when you have one world of women, you're either binarily either in the project or you're out of it.
Yeah.
So if you're that creates a very tough position. So I like to come in with maybe purchasing at least two in a project. Oftentimes I'll try to purchase 10 or more into a project.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of a rule that a lot of people learn early is to buy multiple because like you said, when you only have one, you're either in or you're out. I'd love to know what kind of goes into you developing conviction in a project. Like what kind of factors do you take into account when you're figuring out like which project to actually make an investment in? Because I think a lot of people would be curious about that. Like how do you develop that conviction? How do you do that research?
Yeah, so I mean, on the show, I often talk about you need a docs team. In addition to a docs team, you need to understand what their background is. You need to understand the long-term vision of the project, and then, if possible, doing a little bit more research on them and just observing. Right? Like everyone talks a great game in the NFT space. Everyone's going to create a video game. Everyone's going to create tokenomics. Everyone's going to do put together a roadmap that sounds wonderful. Um, One of the easiest things I think is I'll rule out a project immediately if they do a like, retweet, and tag like four friends or whatever. That's a pretty clear indicator to me that you don't understand how to do community engagement. Maybe if you do one of those, you're going to end up being like, occasionally some are okay, but for the most part, it's a very poor way of engaging with your fan group. So that would rule it out. Non-docs team rules it out. And if I don't think that they're good at executing, like everyone knows, look, I mean, I'm not trying to shit on individual projects, but
Yeah.
I could list off multiple projects that have total fucking dog shit as far as what their artwork is and what their execution is that have raised over $10 million. And so to me, it's always an issue of, do I believe the team can execute as well? I mean, I'm a very big fan of Yam with World of Women, which is what we're looking at. I
Yep.
bought into those initially, probably around 0.1.
Yep.
So, yeah, and I did take profits. I mean, I probably had 45 of them to begin with, and now I probably have 15 left or something like that. And would it be ideal if I still had 45? Absolutely. But
A lot of
I also
risk.
don't think, you know, you're going to really need extreme conviction with that. So my largest conviction play is VeeFriends and Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm just a believer in that ecosystem. I'm a believer in him as somebody who is capable of executing at a really high level. And I think on a blended average, I'm probably up between 10 and 30x on my investments with Vaynerchuk.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have that same conviction for Gary Vee. You know, when you're talking about like the way that you're going about this research, I think people would be curious to know, how do you actually do it? Like you're talking about having a docs team and, you know, taking different factors into account. Do you try to talk to people that are in your networks? Do you try to talk to people that are associated with the project? How do you go about it? And obviously everyone listening needs to keep in mind that Josh has, I think Josh, I think you'd be comfortable, you know, with me saying this, more than the average person has in terms of the amount of capital you have available to deploy. And sometimes that can open doors, right? Like you bought, I think, I don't know how many of our NFT that you bought, but you bought a bunch of them and you're like, can I get a call at this point? And I was like, yeah, you can absolutely get a call, right? When somebody buys so many of something, you can kind of get a call with the creators. That luxury isn't afforded to everybody, but there's still things that the average person can do to do the proper research to develop at least a solid amount of conviction in a given project.
Yeah, and let's be honest. If you put $1,000 into NFTs, you're more liquid than your average person. Like maybe
Yeah.
only 1% of the world population has any NFTs,
Yeah.
and managing liquidity is really important. It doesn't matter if you have $2,000 or $20 million that you're going to be putting into NFTs. The way that you manage your liquidity is going to be equally important. I run an NFT fund. I also have a large percentage of my personal assets in NFTs, which, yeah, I mean, I do have more than probably your average individual, but, um, you know, I tend to be somebody that believes really heavily in doing bets that you really believe in. And I think a lot of retail investors feel like, let's say I've got $5,000 to invest. They almost feel like there's a ticking shot clock running. And oh
Right.
my God, I missed Bored Apes. I got to get into the next Bored Apes. Well, the reality is the next Bored Apes isn't going to be a PFP. It's going to be something else. It's going to look completely different. And you don't have to swing at every pitch. And there's certain math that oh, someone just asked, what can you explain what you mean by running an NFT fund? Just a fancy way of saying that I manage my own money and other people invest as LPs into a fund which I run, which basically just means I invest on behalf of other people. So, not really that fancy, but whether you look at these mega hedge funds that are going to be like, the Citadels or the Millenniums, or, I'm very far on the small side of the spectrum with AUM. So, it just means other people give money to my fund and invest it.
Still a big responsibility, though, to actually take other people's money. And I'd imagine that you only accept money above a certain threshold, right? I'd imagine that that is a pretty big responsibility nonetheless, especially when you're investing in such a new and risky market, unproven market.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, my LPs are very, very, very aware of the high risk nature of this. You're not getting into investing in NFTs or investing into an NFT fund in the hopes of yielding like an 11%. It's almost
It's
a
all or
reality
nothing,
where
right?
these people want a 10x or they want to have you know a zero, right? Like not much in between. Um, Someone just asked me about the project. So, I don't want to sit on here and chill. If you want me to talk about it,
Well, look, I mean, as you're talking about Zachariah, I think a couple people have asked if you've been living under a rock or you're brand new to the NFT space. This is Gary Vaynerchuk's VeeFriends project. The floor is 13 Ethereum. It's an expensive project. We can talk, Josh. Why don't we talk about what prompted you to? And I'm going to quote you, YOLO bomb into this project because I remember that is the
yeah.
description that you gave. What kind of prompted you to do that?
Well, it was this really interesting inflection point, right? So when VeeFriends came out, I feel like I feel like the price of Bitcoin was right around 55,000. Two things happened at the same time. So let me just take a step back and
Sure.
talk about like kind of my background from the beginning.
Yeah.
Got a law degree, went to undergrad, have a degree in psychology, paid my way through college playing poker for the most part. After college,
Very
I started.
similar to trading NFTs, right? Or at least in the same direction.
Well, I think there's a lot of lessons you can learn from being a poker player that translate. I think there tend to be a lot of poker players in the NFT space. Like Zeneca was a professional player. He and I are friends. You know, there's a certain amount of overlap that coincides with it. I think bankroll management, acceptance of risk, the way that you manage your emotions, you don't go on tilt. Things along those lines are things that I think are really important. After law school, I opened up a chain of CrossFit gyms, got a bunch of views online. We were pretty successful. Exited those. Was recruited by a VC firm to help do some marketing for a turnaround of an oil and tech company in Houston, which was a really interesting thing. And then I moved to New York in about 2016, and I raised I want to say about $7 million for my seed round of a co-working space in New York City. That was going really well. We were profitable. We were, on paper worth about 40 million. And then COVID hit and we just went bankrupt. Like it was like 5 years of work and then 3 months of COVID and we were done. So that was pretty rough. When that happened, I lost a lot of my net worth on paper, which was challenging, but I'd been investing in crypto since about 2016.
Hmm.
And I took
Good time
all
to
the money that,
start.
what's that?
Good time to start.
Yeah,
2016.
yeah, it was good. And so in about April of 2020, I took all my money and split between Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I ended up getting really lucky with that. Maybe I got a 10x on all my money.
Hmm.
And then From there, Bitcoin was sitting around 55,000. I saw VeeFriends was coming out. And I did a lot of research. I mean, I probably was researching NFTs for 2 or 3 months before I bought a single NFT.
Yeah.
And when I went to get VeeFriends, I saw Elon Musk was getting a lot of shit for no longer accepting Bitcoin for
Yeah.
Tesla. And I just saw that, like, if a CEO gets treated in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable if they decide not to keep Bitcoin on the books or not to continue with Bitcoin, it made it more challenging for corporate adoption. And I was
Yeah.
talking to a lot of CEOs out there. And so I thought maybe Bitcoin short run isn't a great move. And I was just doing a ton of research. I really believed in VeeFriends because it checked off boxes for me. One of the things I thought about it was Gary, already a pretty successful person. I don't know his exact net worth, but I would reasonably say if he was a seed round investor in Coinbase and a bunch of these other companies, he has 2 or 3 exits. He's easily worth north of $100 million,
Sure.
which means even in New York City, the guy could take a step back today, never work another day in his life.
Yeah.
So that was the one thing of, like, it's not a cash grab, or like, why risk your entire reputation on a cash grab? Because when you have like $100 million, there's very few things in the world that you could buy with $1 billion that you can't buy with 100 million. I mean,
Right.
obviously he wants to get the Jets, but I think that's neither here nor there. So I saw it wasn't a cash grab. Guy has an extreme amount of competence in social media, branding, and marketing. And just looking at his track record, I just feel like the guy executes. He's a very, very hard worker, and he doesn't seem like someone who would walk away from something when it gets hard. And it's almost like he has the energy of an early stage entrepreneur, but that was the first time you could actually invest in him. So I put, maybe like 10% of my net worth into the project when it started, but then Ethereum crashed down to about $2,000 a coin, and his project like went all the way to the lowest numbers on the Dutch auction. Everything just seemed super cheap, and I shoved all my money into it. Not really a lot behind that, but that ended up being a really good move, because when my previous company went bankrupt, I actually moved into my mom's basement in Pittsburgh, which was like really humbling to go from being a CEO in New York City of a relatively successful company to having gone bankrupt. I was dating a girl. The girl that I was dating, and I was like, well, I've got enough money from trading crypto. We could buy a house, or we could like move into your parents' home, and I'll just put that all into NFTs. So that was what we did. I shoved all the money into NFTs, and in retrospect, it ended up being a good investment. I ended up raising some outside capital. I think my first year we did like 500 to 1,000% on the fund, and that's kind of how I got to today.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great story, Josh. And just to fill in some blanks, because I saw some people in the audience, I don't know if they're new to NFTs or they're still kind of getting clarity on the picture. Someone was saying that even with $1 billion, you can't buy good art with regard to VeeFriends. First of all, I don't think that Gary Vee's a billionaire. And then second of all, he could have partnered with a big time artist, but this is something that you need to understand with NFTs is that a lot of people, when they first get into NFTs, they think of NFTs as digital art. When you watch CNBC and you see people talking about NFTs on CNBC, they say digital art. That's kind of like the entry level understanding of what NFTs are. But what they really are is just like kind of it's tokenized ownership of an entity, whatever that entity is. In the case of Gary Vee, it's really access to Gary Vee and speculation that Gary Vee is going to do big things in this NFT space, and thus the value of these assets is going to go up. So Gary wanted to make something that was true to himself, and so he did his own doodles for the VeeFriends project so that it felt true to Gary and it wasn't something where he hired an outside artist, because quite frankly, the art doesn't matter. You could have literally put like a red dot in the middle of a white page and you still would have bought it, because that's not what this particular NFT is about. I just wanted to clear that up. So moving on from VeeFriends, moving on from how
One thing
Josh...
I'd like to say on that,
Sure.
because I think it's really important, is anyone that is going to sit from a position of like being pious and saying this is good art and that is good art is totally full of shit. pretty much means that you don't have an understanding of art. So if you go through traditional art worlds, we can look at like Jackson Pollock. He has art that looks like someone just threw paint on a canvas and it will trade for like 80 million. You can take a step back and look at like Andy Warhol put together soup cans that were Campbell's soup, right? And at the time, that was like controversial because they were just soup cans. Goes a step further. Andy Warhol had piss paintings, which was where he would have his interns piss on pieces of copper. It would oxidize, and those sell for millions. So the idea of somebody sitting there saying, this is, well, Pixelmon is fucking horrible.
Well,
The idea
VeeFriends,
for someone to sit there and say, this is good art or that is not good art, I think that the market decides what's good art. You know, you've got the angel up there, and is that worth $1, $1 million, $100 million? It's worth what the market will pay. And art is just something where like it's very subjective. So like being upfront, I talk to a lot of traditional art collectors who are legacy art collectors of Picassos and Van Goghs and things of that
yeah.
nature. And it's very, very hard to say what constitutes good or bad art. And, you know, truly it's in the eye of the beholder, but you're absolutely right that, these are far more than just a piece of art.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, I just want to make it clear the distinction is like when you talk about Picasso, Andy Warhol, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Van Gogh, all these big names, these are artists, right? And so Gary Vaynerchuk is not an artist and never claimed to be. There is a visual associated with his NFT. There's a front end, but that's not to be misunderstood. Gary Vee did not say, this is my art project, I'm going to sell this in Christie's, even though he did, about the art, right? There is a front end, but it's not an art project. There are art projects in the NFT space. If you buy a piece by, whoever, Beige or Fuck Render, that is an art piece. It's not a sure, there's a back end in terms of what they're going to do to reward holders, but it's not a business project, so to speak, the way that a VeeFriends is, or the way that, like, say, the Bud Light project came out, right? That wasn't about the art. It's about buying an NFT that represents ownership of Bud Light's entry into the NFT space and the bet that they are going to do things that will make the value of the NFT appreciate in the future. I just wanted to kind of clarify that distinction because some of the comments made me think that people were relatively new.
I like the comment by Muhammad says, Josh is the type of guy to steal your girl and explain why it was the only logical decision for all parties involved.
I saw that and I got a kick out of it. And one last thing on Pixelmon in the comments. Pixelmon is just a straight up rug pull. So it doesn't matter what the art is. It doesn't matter. Someone extracted $70 million of liquidity from the NFT market and is going to deliver absolutely nothing and never intended to. So that's like a pretty intense situation. So,
yeah. One thing I would mention is I don't even know that I would say Gary is not an artist. I think that the art is a single variable in a multivariable equation, right? So you and I will take a look at the VeeFriends and we'll say it's good art, bad art, medium art, but we're also absolutely acknowledging that the art is not the only thing which you're paying for, right? And you do get access to it. You do get, for me, like one of the things I think is really important is access groups, having smart people like yourself to bounce ideas off of. And I think it's really important to have groups where you are challenged in the way that you think, because I'm wrong all the time, and I've never met someone that's right all the time, but that's how you learn. I think access to a good group of people is really important.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, what's going on in the market right now. Someone brought up Invisible Friends. I think it's worth actually talking about it. I was fortunate enough that I got to mint one of these Invisible Friends. Excuse me. I sold it towards 9.
Yep.
My original intention was to hold it, and that would have been very on brand for me because I guess, I'm just the kind of guy that holds everything, right? The thing that got me was the current events of the world, right? The potential for war and what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, and talking to really smart people like you and hearing that you think that there may be some turbulence. So, and I agree with that. I don't really see any situation where this holds 9 Ethereum floor in the short term, but obviously, if I had held mine fine. And I got a really rare one, that would have been worth it. If I got one of the one of ones, that would have been like a life-changing experience. So there's risks on both sides, but I elected to take the money. I actually converted the Ethereum, and this was me basically going back on my initial word, which I hate doing, but the current events of the Russia-Ukraine situation put me in a position where I felt like it was the only thing for me to do. So I converted the Ethereum to USDC, and I am getting 8% yield on it, and I'm just viewing it as a wonderful win in the NFT space, a responsible move, and I'd love to get back into Invisible Friends because I have a lot of theories on why this is like, a blue chip project or whatever you want to call it. I think it's a very notable thing and a good one to hold. You said something interesting on our morning Twitter space. You said that you would take the under, and you would say that you think that 1 year from now, Invisible Friends would be worth less in US dollar value than it is today. And I thought that that was really, really interesting. I'd love to know what you're like, walk me through your thought process on why that's the case.
Well, it's a little bit overly simplistic, but I am making almost exclusive bets on utility and gaming this year. And I don't see either of those in this project. With that being said, I also think 95% of new projects are going to go to zero. And so that's not really something specific about Invisible Friends, but I'm looking at the project, months to hype it up, got an awesome reception, came out with a really high floor, but contrasting it with like VeeFriends, I mean, to me, you've got a lot of utility in one project, and I'm not aware of what any utility is with Invisible Friends. So it's just an art project at the end of the day if there's no utility. Do I think they make cool PFPs? Absolutely. Does the artwork look really cool before it's revealed? Yeah, 100%. But I just think it's very, very hot today. Now, is there a chance they execute and end up being worth 50 Ethereum? Sure. But if I'm thinking from your position, I don't know your net worth, but I feel
It's a lot, Josh. It's a lot.
I feel like as your friend that like 30 grand could be meaningful for you, whatever that means, and so if you're going to take a random bet on something, that feels bet size to be a little big, where, if you could take 30 grand off the table, I think that's the right play. Now, look, maybe there's a 40% chance that this ends up being worth more in a year, but to have a coin flip where you bet 20 or 30 grand, I feel like why not take the money off the table, wait till you have a play where you have a wildly high conviction in, and bet on that. Even if this goes up, I think when I hear you speak on it, you're like, well, it sounds good. But to me, when I hear you speak, you don't sound like you have the conviction of like, this sounds $30,000 good, just like sounds better than not.
It's hard to get that conviction, right? And my conviction on this one comes from the fact that, it's the most hyped up drop ever in the NFT space. I can objectively say that. I mean, surprisingly enough, it's more hyped up than Gary V's because, like you said, Gary V's hit the floor of the Dutch auction. I think that's because of how early we were. And when you look at the volume of liquidity in the NFT market at that time, it reflects that, right? However, with this one, I think that the bullish signs for it are the idea that motion PFPs, like moving PFPs, which these will be moving PFPs, will have their kind of time and will be a hot trend once Twitter updates their technology. So that can be a thing. I know that feels like, not the strongest bull case, but I think if you really think about it, the impact of PFPs was so robust in the NFT space, and we saw that right off the bat pretty early on with CryptoPunks and other projects that ended up getting used as PFPs, Bored Apes, obviously. I don't think that you can totally count that out. The other thing is that the creators' understanding of the network effect and the way that they did this, partnering with the Mood Rollers and Slim Hoods, and the value that got, or just the price action being, increased on both of those, the floors moving up on both of those projects was really something to see, I think, because Slim Hoods was at 0 before that announcement, and it went up to like almost 2 Ethereum. I wouldn't be surprised if they onboard another hyped up artist and make Invisible Friends part of the whitelist process for that. But as you kind of think of this stuff out loud, I don't really think that you can bank on that. So I think that you are right. Having said that, Doodles has the floor that it has. World of Women has the floor that it has. So there is a case to be made for just really good art projects having high floors and being valuable. But I get
So,
your framing on that. Yeah.
so when I look at World of Women, I think they're building a lot of interesting stuff out with that project. Do you own any World of Women, Pio?
I wish I did, but I don't. I interviewed the founders of World of Women when the floor was at point 0.4. Ask me anything.
Yeah, yeah. No, she's really smart.
Yeah,
One of the things
Yaman
that's
Roth.
cool is they do these airdrops into your wallet. So depending on the type of World Woman you have, you get specific pieces of art. A project that I'm advising is Amber Vittoria. She's a phenomenal artist, huge fan of her. Also, got a good piece of her collection. And she's got like 5 or 6 different projects. That's the alphabet one that you just pulled up. But World of Women did a collab with her where they gave away some of her art for free. And so they're constantly building out this portfolio of drops that goes into your wallet. It's very rarely talked about. There's different utilities baked into different types of the World of Women. Some will give you actual capital back if you have like the World of Women earrings and necklace. There's a lot of constant work going on. And then I'm also watching the growth of their channel. Their channel is getting to be like 100,000 subscribers on or followers on Twitter. And the fact that they're constantly doing things is bullish for me, but it's really bullish that they picked up Guy Osseri, who is I believe he's a CAA agent, and he's the agent that came on board with Bored Ape Yacht Club. So I feel like, to me, a lot of times it's all about what is the process and what is the level of work people are putting in to constantly day in and day out provide some value. But absolutely, like, I'm not familiar with Doodles, so I don't want to say they're going to do badly. But if you just give me a random project, like what's the background of the founders of Invisible Friends? Like, I don't know anything about them.
So Motion Marcus is an animator and has a big following on other social media platforms, right? So, that thesis is working pretty well. And I'll give you my take on it is I look at something like Cool Man's Universe, and it looks like, yeah, we've cooled off a little bit. This was kind of living above 2 Ethereum for a little bit. I'm really bullish on this one, right? We interviewed the founder of this, Cool Man Coffee Dan. He has millions of followers on Instagram. It's been his full-time job to make these cartoons and make content with these cartoons for a couple of years, right? There's another one that we're interviewing on Tuesday, Pop Art Cats by Matt Chesko. Almost identical situation. I love to bet on people that have been doing art full-time already and have their own followings. They then discover the NFT space and they recognize that through the NFT space, they can continue doing their art, but it gives them this medium to actually build a full business behind the artwork and ultimately make more money. There's no way to make more money as an artist than the NFT space, unless you're literally that top 0.001%, like Jeff Koons level. I don't even know if he's at that level, right? I don't even know how much money Jeff Koons makes. It seems like most artists make the most money after they die. Look at Basquiat and Jackson Pollock and Van Gogh, right? But it seems...
Well, you've got Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons,
but how much does Damien Hirst make outside of NFTs, right? I'd imagine that NFTs...
An enormous amount. I mean, he
Okay,
sells individual artwork for like $90 million.
Okay, so there you go. So he's like an Andy Warhol type that's still alive, and that's awesome. But
Yeah.
for something like Cool Man's Universe, he's going to make more money in the NFT space. And so then you have these people entering the NFT space because they recognize that, and there's usually a little bit of turbulence after the primary sale. Like the primary sale usually sells out because of the kind of pedigree that the person is coming from. They're like, he has a following, he's going to sell it out, he or she, I should say. But then there's a little bit of a turbulence turbulent period where they figure out how to make NFTs work. But I bet on those people to figure out how to make NFTs work because they recognize that they're going to make more money through NFTs, and they're still just doing their art. They're not doing something completely different.
So here's the issue that I see with these. We can hypothesize that we're in the first inning of investing in NFTs.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're an internet, we're dial-up internet, right? If we're automobiles, the first few automobiles have come out, but the infrastructure of roadways haven't been created yet. If we're electricity, we're still in the days of battling between alternating and direct current. And a light bulb is the most utility that we have with electricity. So let's say that we're very, very, very early in the stages of things. My biggest concern with these art projects is there's a lot of money flowing into them because it's almost art or really low utility. Like, let's take Bored Ape Yacht Club. I'm a fan. What's the utility? I got to drop like $100 on a sweatshirt. For $250,000, I can attend a warehouse party in Brooklyn. And, and the reason I say this is just, it's an amazing project. The network effect, I believe in it. It's something that I think is doing really well. But the reality is there's very, very, very little utility in every NFT project. And I think VeeFriends has the best utility or within the top 5 projects. And even their utility is fairly low.
Mm-hmm.
So my concern is when you get real utility with the stuff, PO, when you have things that provide value that is in direct proportion to the amount of money they cost, not spending $250,000 to get a ticket to a yacht party and also a sweatshirt, but you spend $250,000 and you're going to get free private jets 10 times a year for 3 years or something, real money utility that you would exchange. I think the volume of sales for artists will go down. And my concern is if you drop a project and you mint out in the first couple months, $3 million. Well, you've got the $3 million. Now let's assume that you make $5,000, $10,000 a month into perpetuity. At the end of the day, there are a lot of people that will be de-incentivized to continue to work very, very, very hard when they've already made 90% of the money up front. So if you don't have some recurring revenue model to coincide with it, look, I think Bored Ape Yacht Club, Yugo Labs, they've reached escape velocity. They have so many resources and they're like a $4 billion company. They're going to be just fine. But at the same time, I think for the most part, people need a constant carrot to have a recurring revenue stream. And if you can't figure out a way to make money in the future, my concern is that many of these projects will end up being abandoned by the creators, even the ones that mean well. It's just at some point in time, you're not going to be an indentured servant for 20 years because you got a lump sum of a few million today. At some point, if they're not generating revenue, they're just going to back off. So you need to have utility. You need to have a long-term vision. For me to invest, there are always going to be exceptions, but that's what I look for is if you don't have a business model beyond I just sell art, and you're not just an artist. Like Amber Vittoria, just an artist. I think she's going to be amazingly successful. One of one artist, doesn't proclaim to be anything other than great art. But when you end up having these projects that allude to utility or roadmap utility or tokenization or community XYZ, that's where I have the concern that eventually somebody stops making money, and maybe they're well-intended and they stick around for 1 month or 3 months or 6 months. But after so long, if you're not making any money in your project, you're going to move on to something that you do.
Are you factoring in royalties here though? Because I think a lot of times in the NFT space, I've found people not fully factoring in royalties. And I think that it's something that people need to really understand. Like, look, Doodles has 85,000 Ethereum of secondary market volume traded. So if I take 85,000 Ethereum, let's say Ethereum is $2,500, right?
Yep.
And then let's say the royalty is 5%. I don't know what the Doodles royalty is. That's a lot of money. I mean, look, I think Doodles is making $50,000 to $100,000 a day off of secondary market royalties when it's really pumping. That 13 Ethereum floor price is something to not sleep on. Couldn't you theorize that something like Doodles or something like Coolmans, if they build out the brand on top of the NFTs in a really robust way, where they're selling collectibles, toys, merch, doing media, TV shows, internet shows, the Doodles brand or the Cool Man's Universe brand or the Bored Ape Yacht Club brand, right? And ultimately, the holy grail of those brands is the digital asset that kicked the whole thing off. Couldn't you see that being the world that we live in, where you can buy the Cool Man's Universe toy for your child, and your child's happy about that toy, and your child can watch the TV show, or maybe it's an adult TV show that's on one of the networks, and there's action figures and merch and posters and everything in between. But ultimately, that NFT is the kind of penultimate asset in that collection. Wouldn't you think that those floors would stay high, that volume of Ethereum traded would be through the roof, and those royalties would keep the brand going?
Well, let's take an objective look at this. Doodles, they're about the number 11 project of all time for all-time sales volume. So there's probably over 5,000 different NFT creators. They are in the top point. They're in the top 1 basis point, 0.01% of all projects. An extreme outlier, right? Yeah. If we took, a look at investments in the seed round of Uber, Facebook, Netflix, like, yes, you're going to get these extreme outliers that probably reach escape velocity. And, and with that, you're going to see, I'm sure Doodles will end up being fine. To talk about your commentary a little bit, everyone just is like, oh, they're going to create a cartoon, they're going to create a game. Do you know how fucking hard it is to make a good cartoon? There might be 5 good cartoons out there. Ninja Turtles, Transformers, like X-Men, right? But think about how many absolute dog shit cartoons there are out there that we watched when we were kids that have no value today. Absolutely right. Zero. And they generated millions.
But let me ask you this. What, like, the way I'm framing it is kind of like the NFT is the sort of the pilot of the IP. And since people are paying 13 Ethereum for this doodle, I would argue that it's proven that there is demand for the doodle's IP. So just like how with X-Men came out, or Marvel Comics, Superman from DC Comics, all these comic book characters came out in the 40s, 50s, 60s, whenever they came out. And they've had movies made a bunch of times, cartoons made a bunch of times. Some of those movies were good, but some of those movies sucked. Some of those cartoons were good, some of those cartoons sucked. The IP is still the IP, and the IP is still something that people get excited about. Couldn't you theorize that maybe the first Doodles cartoon is good and the second one sucks, or the first cartoon sucks and the second one's good, but the IP is still the IP? Could we frame it like the IP is bigger than any individual effort at a TV show, movie, blah, blah, blah?
Well, people have emotional connection tied to the story, which gives value to the IP. Everyone likes Wolverine because he's a flawed individual. They associate with him. It makes him one of the most popular characters. That creates the IP. I'm looking at the doodle there, blue face, one eye off. I don't know anything about that character's background. I don't know their inception story. I don't know if they're a good doodle, a bad doodle, a medium doodle. Are they a nice doodle? No idea. So what you're talking about with the IP that exists is the IP of art, right? So this would be like saying Basquiat's a wildly good painter. I'm going to turn his artwork into cartoons because there's value in the IP. Maybe it works, but the reality is possible.
Not exactly though. That's the thing. I'm not comparing Doodles to like a fine artist like Basquiat, right? Basquiat never made like a collection of characters like this. You know, I'm drawing a distinction between like a one of one fine artist. Let's call it Basquiat. It feels
Right.
funny to call him that, but he's a one of one fine artist, if you will,
Mhm.
versus like one of these NFT collections that has like kind of an IP. I like comparing it to like the collection of characters in Marvel, for example, you know, in that ecosystem. And it's almost like each NFT collection is its own comic book ecosystem.
Yeah. So look, you have an investment thesis that says there's a possibility that the IP from an NFT can translate over into a cartoon. And that's a possibility. You and I will both acknowledge that possibility is a reality. The likelihood of successfully executing on a transition of IP from NFT to cartoon is where you and I disagree. You probably are saying it's a 70% or 50% chance that this has a positive crossover. And because it holds value as an NFT, the likelihood is X that it becomes a valuable TV show. In my opinion, the likelihood is probably less than 5%. Not zero, but maybe 1 in 20 of these projects with IP end up having value. It just depends on the writers, but the challenge is it's a completely different skill set, even though these things are adjacent to one another and they sound very similar. There's intellectual property in the artwork and being part of the community and having a tribe and being your own unique member within a tribe. There's value in that. Is that value going to translate over to a cartoon show? Maybe. Do I think it will? No. Do I think it's possible? Absolutely. Could you be right and I'm wrong? 100%. But I wouldn't place a bet that says that will occur. And I'm 100% open to the idea that I'm wrong and I miss a big bet. Like I've missed a lot of great upside bets. But to me, when you understand how challenging it is to create like a BoJack Horseman or a really high quality um, content show, it's challenging. Those shows, when they're successful, often last a season or two. But what is the most successful cartoon show of all time? Probably The Simpsons. I mean,
Yep.
and maybe The Simpsons, maybe it's South Park. What has the best IP? It's pretty clearly Disney
Yep.
as a value proposition. But there's yes, if someone can do it, it'll be great. But do I think that it's going to be an easy transition? I don't. I think it's possible. I just think it's challenging.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think that I didn't assign a percentage. I don't think it's like 50%, 70%, but my thoughts are, because I did work in the entertainment industry, before NFTs, is that, BoJack Horseman, yes, it's a successful show. The Simpsons has had a rotating, musical chairs type of arrangement when it comes to writers, even voice actors, things like that. So there are professionals that when they're given the IP can execute. So I think about that. The other thing that I think about is everyone says that 99.9% of NFT projects are going to go to zero. I totally agree with that. But the thing that I think that they're not saying is that tens of thousands of projects are coming out on a quarterly basis, right? So I think 99.99% of projects are going to zero. But I do think that 25, 50 projects, when you divide 25 or 50 by 150,000 projects a year or more, I don't even know how many projects there are, that 0.01% starts to make a lot of sense. And if Doodles, World of Women, Cool Man's Universe, whatever, Bored Ape Yacht Club are, part of that 25 or 50 projects, then I think it makes sense. And it's your job, if you're a long-term investor, to identify those projects. Sounds like you identified World of Women, slam dunk. I know you have Mutant Apes like I do, slam dunk. VeeFriends, same deal. So, we've been going long. I want to run for another 12 or so minutes. We can top it off at an hour. I wanted to see what your thoughts are on Metaverse Land, because the market seems to be valuing it in a big way right now. And I'm just wondering, do you have exposure to this? You were talking about gaming. You were talking about non-PFP projects. What are your thoughts on Metaverse Land, whether it's World Wide Web Land, the Sandbox, Decentraland, or something else?
So I've got a real estate background. I've owned multifamily homes on my own as an investor. My last venture was a co-working space in New York City, so commercial office space in New
Yep.
York City. I do some consulting with larger landowners, people that own multi-billions in land. Uh, it's hard for me to wrap my head around virtual land having value. I know it does. I know people are paying money for it. When I look at traditional real estate, you've got a few value propositions there. If it's residential, you can live in it. It's a status symbol. It helps with mate selection, whatever that means to you. If you have a really fancy apartment in the center of Manhattan that has those value propositions, you can have a party at your house. You can invite people over. You could have a guest spend the night with you. There are a lot of things that can be valuable to that. That's one thing. It has utility. Thing number two, there's frictional cost if you live in White Plains. It could take you an hour or two to get from Manhattan to White Plains, right? So if you're in the suburbs, it's harder for people to get there. Frictional costs to get there. And there's a finite amount of real estate, and there is an extreme frictional cost to build up, because as you build up, things get exponentially more expensive. Here's the issue. With virtual real estate, you have some utility that people can come there, but you can't live in your virtual real estate. It doesn't really, for the most part, help with mate selection. There's very low frictional cost that comes into, you could push a button and jump from one universe to another. You could jump an infinite amount of space in a few seconds, which you can't do with physical real estate. And it's not clear that it's scarce. Any one of these companies could immediately push a button and make the amount of real estate available 10 times bigger. Any of these virtual real estates could be the MySpace of virtual real estate, and something else comes along. I'm sure once one dominant player is identified, it will probably end up having value, but it just doesn't have enough of a value proposition for me personally to make a bet on it. So I have no exposure.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, it's a bold bet if you're buying at these prices, because we've seen a recent run, like we've seen a number of runs, right? When Facebook first announced their rebrand to Meta, that prompted the sort of first like major bull run. I know that Sandbox and Decentraland had performed incredibly well since 2018. One of the investors in the Nifty, Maddie DCL blogger, shout out to Maddie, he's been long DCL, Decentraland, since I think 2018. Genius investment if you bought it in 2018.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, after the rebrand to Meta, we saw a gnarly bull run on Sandbox Land. I believe it was like half ETH or 0.75 ETH floor to like north of 3 ETH where we're at now. We've seen a recent run on projects like NFT Worlds, which I have pulled up right now, and World Wide Web Land. I think it is a tough call to buy in now, but I always try to put my futurist cap on. And I try to think about what things will be like in like 10 years. And, VR goggles does come to my mind. I know a lot of people try to separate the idea of VR from metaverse and that we're already in the metaverse. And I do agree with that. But I feel like as we get deeper and deeper and deeper, if these different metaverses become the sort of gold standard for what you want in a metaverse, just like Bored Ape Yacht Club is the gold standard in what you want in a PFP, then I do think that these investments will work out. But I don't know about buying a single NFT world at 13 ETH right now. That seems like a bold bet.
So look, in my opinion, you can't have sex in the metaverse, right? And that's something that you can do in real life. Like I've got a degree in psychology. I believe in Freudian psychology, that a lot of what human beings do relates to the ability to have a mate, right? And it doesn't matter your orientation, whether you're straight, gay, something else in the middle. A lot of what we do as human beings, whether it's fashion or real estate, or a lot of these things, deal with sex. I mean, it's just a reality that you can't engage with in the virtual world. So that's a big minus for the virtual world. I would be most bullish on virtual real estate that has superpowers with it, because while you can't have sex in virtual real estate, you could shoot fireballs. And so I think that some of the most interesting virtual real estate to me, if I was going to buy, would be like if World of Warcraft, which I believe was acquired by Microsoft, started selling virtual real estate, and there was utility with your magic powers in there. Or if Rockstar took Grand Theft Auto and you could buy real estate that had gaming utility. To me, that sounds really interesting. And it's not to be weird about sex, but something that's not talked about. And there's a reality that does drive a lot of decision making of people in the real world, and you can't do that in the virtual world. So that's one of the things that I think you have to, if you could fly in a virtual world and have superpowers and have duels and like race cars that never get damaged, I think those are the things that are going to make people interested in the real world, is being able to do things that are superhuman in a virtual world that you couldn't do. Just the idea of me walking around in Second Life and I jump and it seems like what I would do as a normal person, that's not super interesting to me. I mean, I haven't met anybody that was like captivated by a virtual world outside of video games, or like a Minecraft where you could really build an elaborate structure. Or, there's a lot of virtual worlds out there that I think are good, but they're almost all in gaming.
I actually love what you said there, and I think that you're probably right that the most valuable ones will have like this gnarly gaming utility and superhero type stuff. I love that response, Josh. The only thing I would add is and you're talking about like attracting a mate and like I don't know what the word would be, but basically just showing your personal worth, right? Showing your value. What about if you own virtual land that becomes really valuable, and maybe it's the land that you're talking about with like video game utility and stuff like that, superpowers and everything like that. And in the future, our social media is deeply integrated with NFTs, which I think you can already see is happening. You can already confirm that you have an NFT as your profile picture on Twitter. Facebook is obviously a rebrand to Meta. They're going deep into the metaverse, going deep in NFTs. What if on Instagram and on Twitter, you have your whole NFT portfolio and it's just deeply ingrained to social media, which doesn't seem to be going anywhere? And people can see your worth by how much money you have in these assets, right? Because I can't take a screenshot of my stock portfolio or my bank account and just put it on my Instagram. People would be like, this guy's the biggest douchebag in the world. But I can connect my Ethereum wallet and show you that I have a mutant ape and I have, the whole collection of, Sandbox Land, and I'm worth $500,000. And it's a socially acceptable way for me to flex because they're NFTs. It's not a screenshot of my bank account where I have, a $500,000, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I don't know if you can see my watch here, but I've got,
An MFer on an
yeah,
Apple
yeah,
Watch,
I
baby.
got a motherfucker on that. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, do I think that that helps with mate selection? Absolutely. Does it speak to social hierarchy? Yes. And that absolutely can help, right? Or that can be a way that you can flex online and you can have, your social status increase because, oh shit, Po's got $3 million in NFTs. And absolutely, yes, it can be used. And I think that the ability to flex to a large number of people is a really big value, right? Like if you have a Ferrari, how many people really know that Po's rocking a Ferrari? Unless you put it on your Instagram or something else. And, you could have a Bored Ape that costs the same amount and you could, impress people with your wealthy ape. So I agree with that. It's a value proposition of NFTs in general, but I don't think it's anything unique about virtual universes, right? Like whether I have a ether rock, whether I have $1 million piece of virtual real estate, whether I've got a gold Bored Ape, whether I've got an alien crypto punk, I mean, any of those things are going to be like an opulent display of wealth.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, we're definitely on the same page there. Before we wrap, I just pulled up Invisible Friends. It's revealing right now. Here's the big reveal. Here's what Invisible Friends look like.
Let's look at your specific one that you sold.
Should we?
Yeah, I
That's
think that's what we do.
That's kind of a scary thing to do, Josh.
Well, let's end on a bang. Let's hope you sold a floor one, not a like $2 million invisible friend. I see you like sweating here. I like this.
You're making me do this, right? I said I wasn't going to do this ever.
Let's do it. Let's find out what we sold.
Oh my God. All right. Well, hey, look, everybody, you can thank Josh for this incredibly nerve-wracking thing. This is all right. Look, however this goes, everybody, I don't regret selling it. Okay. However it goes, it goes. I had to do something responsible for once. Josh is putting me on the spot. Let's see the damn invisible friend. I'm like having trouble even looking.
I like that idea of looking.
All right. What do we got?
Sold for all eight. So that's a big number. What
It
is
sold within 2 minutes of me listing it there, even though that wasn't even the floor because somebody wanted the all eights.
it?
I think I might have to refresh metadata here, or it's not revealed yet. Well, we'll see. You're gonna see a grown man crumble if it's one of the 101s. Let's see.
I'll feel bad. I gave you the advice that it might go down.
No, look, I talked to a lot of people. Basically, no one said that I should hold it. And I didn't make the decision based on anyone else. Like I said, it was the climate. And we didn't even talk about, we should have probably talked more about 2022 and you know what you think's coming in terms of turbulence and things like that. We kind of got deep into projects, but maybe next time we have you on, we can talk about that a little bit. We'll see where the market is at that point. Well, thank God, everybody. Mine is not revealed yet, so we don't have to check what I sold. I'm off the hook. Any closing thoughts? Maybe we can go for another 5 minutes, Josh, on, you know, what people should expect this year and maybe some of the turbulence that you've been referencing.
Well, look, there's just far too many slow rugs happening, and I'll define that as like a low effort project. Someone raises an enormous amount of money, and then they hire a few people for $1 million, and then nothing. And it looks like the audience is saying it's legendary.
No way. No way.
Garrett says it's legendary for real. Like,
no way. No.
There's a lot.
No way.
There are a lot of people saying that. So I think that we're going to get into some levels of regulation. I think that we're going to, oh shit, it was a good ranking, says the JC Files. Oh man. Well, it's ranked in the top 10%, 729, 101. Oh man. It was good.
What happened?
I guess the audience said it was a 101. It's ranked 729. Supposedly it was a really good one.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we really appreciate you watching the show. Josh, thanks so much for coming on, buddy. And this was fantastic. You know, sometimes you pull a rare of the hottest project of all time and you sold it pre-reveal, I guess. But Josh, looking forward to having you on again. I think everyone enjoyed the talk.
Pio, I really appreciate you taking the time to interview me. This was a ton of fun. Happy to come back on sometime.
Sounds good, brother. Well, thanks for coming on. We'll see you later, everyone.